He lent his phone to a crying girl at the subway, not knowing she was a runaway heiress looking for true love. "I'm sorry, my phone's gone. I can't call anyone." Her voice was thin, almost swallowed by the roar of the approaching train. "I've only got a few minutes before my ride. Sorry," a man muttered, stepping away. It was nearly 9:00 p.m. at the East 86th Street subway station, and the platform buzzed with after-work exhaustion and hurried steps. The overhead lights flickered like tired eyes, luggage wheels rattled, sneakers scuffed against concrete, and announcements echoed above the chaos, barely intelligible. New York at rush hour had no room for hesitation, no time for the fragile. Noah stood off to the side, a black canvas bag slung across his shoulder, headphones resting loosely around his neck. At 32, he had learned to blend in, one of 1,000 quiet faces moving through the city's bloodstream. A freelance graphic designer with no fixed schedule, he often traveled late when the trains were half empty and the silence could finally breathe. He had just wrapped a long project, logos for a startup that wanted to be clean, bold, and spiritual, but edgy. It paid well enough to cover rent and refill his favorite coffee beans. That night, he was thinking of dinner, maybe a burrito, maybe leftover noodles. Then he saw her. Sitting alone on the far end of the bench, wrapped in a thick beige coat, was a young woman. Her long blonde hair tumbled over one shoulder, slightly disheveled, as if she had run through wind. Her knees were drawn up, arms wrapped tightly around them, and though her face was turned away, Noah could see the unmistakable tremble of her shoulders. She was crying. Not loudly, not theatrically, just quietly unraveling, right there in the middle of hundreds of rushing people. No one stopped. A businessman glanced, then looked at his watch. A teenager rolled his eyes. Someone muttered, probably drunk, and kept walking. Noah stood frozen for a second. His fingers tightened around his phone. Then he took a step forward. "Excuse me," he said gently, crouching a few feet away. "Are you okay?" The girl jerked her head up. Her eyes were red but alert, cheeks streaked with tears. She looked startled, as though no one had spoken to her in hours. I lost my phone," she stammered. "I need to make a call, just one." But nobody... Noah nodded before she could finish. "It's okay. Here." He held out his phone. "No questions, just take your time." She stared at it. "Are you sure?" "I'm still standing here," he said with a half smile. "Besides, I've still got time for someone who needs to be heard." Her lips trembled. She reached out with trembling fingers and took the phone, her hand cold against his. Noah stepped back, giving her space, watching the way she turned her back to the crowd instinctively, shielding herself. She stared at the screen for a long time. Her fingers hovered over the keypad. She typed something, paused, erased it, then typed again. She never made a call. After what felt like 5 minutes but was probably 2, she returned the phone wordlessly. Her gaze dropped, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." Noah looked down at her. "Do you want me to call someone for you?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I needed to say something, and I didn't know who else to tell." Before he could respond, she stood up abruptly. The train rolled into the station with a gust of wind and blinking headlights. She stepped toward it, but then turned to glance back at him. Just for a second. Her eyes held something Noah couldn't name. Something like pain, or maybe apology. Then she disappeared into the crowd. Noah stood there as the train pulled away, his phone still warm in his hand. He looked at the screen instinctively. A message window was still open. She had typed something but never hit send. It read, "I don't want the money, I just want to be seen." He read it 3 times, then slowly, he closed the screen. The next train wouldn't arrive for another 12 minutes. He sat down on the cold bench where she had just been, the echoes of her voice and that unsent message lingering in the air like smoke. And for reasons he could not explain, Noah did not delete the message. The train had long vanished down the tunnel, leaving only the familiar whoosh of wind and the scent of hot steel behind. Noah remained on the bench, staring at the phone in his hands. The screen was still lit, the messaging app open. She had never hit send. He hesitated, thumb hovering above the glowing rectangle. He knew it was an invasion of privacy to look, but something about the way she had stared at the screen, trembling, aching, as if those words weighed everything she had carried, made him pause. The message was still there, untouched. "I don't want the money, I just want to be seen." 7 words, that was all. But they landed like thunder in the middle of his chest. He stared at them, rereading every syllable. Not for meaning, because the meaning was clear, but for the ache beneath it. The kind of ache that didn't just come from loss, but from being invisible, unheard. He locked his phone and stood slowly, feeling the chill of the subway platform finally settle into his skin. The bench where she'd sat was still warm, faintly so, like the echo of someone who had been there and yet somehow never belonged. By the time he stepped out onto the sidewalk, the city had settled into its usual rhythm. Taxis honked, neon signs blinked, and people moved with the same determined pace they always had. The moment underground already felt like a dream, too delicate for the world above. When he got home, he didn't turn on the lights right away. His apartment was modest, a second-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, sparsely furnished with plants, books, and the sketches he never showed anyone. It smelled faintly of coffee and dust. He dropped his bag, sat on the edge of the couch, and opened his phone again. The message was still there. He didn't delete it. He didn't clear it or save it. He just stared at it, like maybe it would change, like maybe a name would appear or a reason. But none came. Who was she? She hadn't looked like someone who wanted attention. She wasn't dramatic or demanding. She hadn't begged. She had simply needed something. A moment, a person, a breath, and for reasons he could not quite name, Noah had given it. He tried to sleep, but the words stayed with him. Every time he closed his eyes, they hovered behind his lids. Every time he drifted close to sleep, he saw her face, red from crying, but composed. Eyes too tired for someone so young. Blonde hair falling over her coat collar. That glance she had thrown him just before the train doors closed. He had helped her. That should have been enough. A stranger in the city, a moment of kindness. But it didn't feel done. He got up sometime after midnight, made tea, opened his sketchbook. He didn't draw her, he wasn't that kind of person, but the lines that formed beneath his pencil had her quiet in them, her pause, her weight. By morning, the message was still in his phone. Noah didn't know who she was. He didn't know where she had gone. He didn't even know her name. But somehow he knew this wouldn't be the last time he thought of her. And somewhere, deep in a part of him that rarely dared to hope, he wondered if she would come back. Not for the phone, not for the message, but for the one moment when someone had simply seen her. The city moved like always, too fast, too loud, too full of people, in a hurry to be anywhere but here. But that evening, Noah found himself walking slower. He had no particular reason to return to that subway station, no meeting, no job, and yet a quiet pull in his chest guided him back to the platform where, a few nights earlier, a girl with tear-streaked cheeks had borrowed his phone and left behind 7 unforgettable words. He took the same steps, past the same flickering light, the same chipped tile. And there she was, sitting on the same bench. Her long blonde hair was tied back this time, a soft braid resting over her shoulder. She wore the same coat, but now it was buttoned neatly. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, and her eyes, those same tired, striking eyes, were clearer. Still a little sad, but no longer drowning. She looked up and saw him. Noah froze. For a second, the station blurred around him, just noise and motion, but her gaze steadied him. She stood and took a slow step toward him, her boots clicking softly on the concrete. "I didn't think I'd see you again," she said. Her voice was gentle, but firm now, a steadiness in it that hadn't been there before. Noah smiled, unsure what to say. She looked down, then back at him. But every day since, I've come here, not because I had to, because I wanted to. I kept thinking, maybe the man with the kind eyes would pass through again. Noah blinked. You were waiting for me? Not waiting, she said, correcting herself softly. Just hoping. He let out a breath, something between a laugh and disbelief. They stood in silence for a moment, the train rumbling in the distance. Then she tilted her head toward the stairs. Would you like to get a coffee with me? Noah nodded. Yeah, I would. They walked together to a small coffee cart on the corner, one of those tiny silver ones that always smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon. Neither of them spoke much. It was not awkward, just quiet, like the city had turned down its volume for them. He bought her a tea. She added just a little milk. They sat on a bench outside a closed bookstore, paper cups warming their hands. I'm Elena, she finally said after a long sip. You probably deserve to know that. Noah, he replied. She smiled. I'm not ready to explain everything, she said. But I'm not running anymore. Not tonight. You don't have to explain anything, Noah said. Not to me. She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her posture softened. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breath slowed. In the background, a street violinist began to play. A slow, familiar tune neither of them could name, but both instinctively understood. Noah didn't ask her where she lived. He didn't ask what had made her cry. He didn't ask about the message, and Elena didn't offer. They just sat, their drinks half finished, their hearts slightly more open than they had been an hour before. Two people, not looking for answers, just sharing silence in a city that never stopped moving. Every Thursday at 4, they returned to the same small cafe nestled between a flower shop and a bookstore, a place most tourists never noticed. The windows were tall and a little smudged, but the light that came through them made everything inside look softer, like even the hard things in life might bend a little here. It was always quiet in the afternoons. The barista, a woman named June, learned their orders by the second week. Chai for Elena, black coffee with a touch of cinnamon for Noah. She never asked questions, just smiled and slid their mugs across the wooden counter like a silent blessing. They always sat at the table by the window, where they could see the trees swaying in the park across the street. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. But even the silence between them felt full, not empty. Noah spoke more than usual here. Maybe it was the way Elena listened, never interrupting, never rushing him. He told her about growing up in a small apartment with his grandfather, a quiet man who fixed clocks and taught him how to draw before he knew how to spell. He told her how he used to take apart old radios just to see if he could put them back together again, how he hated noise, but loved sound, vinyl crackle, pencil on paper, the creak of old floorboards. I think I was always a little bit behind, he admitted once, staring into his coffee. Like I understood things a few beats after everyone else did. Elena didn't laugh. She just nodded slowly and said, That's probably why you notice what other people miss. She was harder to read, but bit by bit she offered pieces of herself. She never named her family, never said where she lived, but she told him about her childhood, about rooms full of people who smiled with their teeth but never with their eyes, about long dinners where she was taught to listen but not speak, about having everything and feeling like she owned nothing real. Sometimes, she said, tracing the rim of her mug, I felt like wallpaper, pretty, decorative, easy to ignore. Noah's eyes softened. You're not easy to ignore. She smiled, small and unsure, but it stayed longer than before. On their fourth Thursday, she brought a book with her. It was an old copy of The Little Prince, worn at the corners, the pages soft from being turned too often. She placed it on the table between them without a word. Noah raised an eyebrow. Required reading? She shook her head. Just something I loved once, before everything got complicated. He picked it up, flipping through the pages, pausing at underlined sentences and notes written in pencil. A bookmark slipped out and fluttered to the table. It was a folded piece of paper. He opened it gently. On the page, in her handwriting, were the words, "Sometimes a single glance can save a soul." Noah looked up. Alina was watching him, her fingers knotted in her lap. "I wrote that a few days after I met you," she said quietly. "It just came out. I didn't know where to put it, so I kept it in a book. But I think it belongs to you now." The air in the cafe shifted, something unseen but deeply felt. Noah folded the paper and slid it back into the book, holding it carefully. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me see you." Alina exhaled slowly, like she had been holding that breath for years. They didn't say much after that. The conversation drifted into lighter things: favorite movies, the best cookie in the city, the worst haircut either had ever gotten. But something had changed. The quiet between them wasn't just comfortable now, it was shared. That day, as they left the cafe, walking side by side toward the setting sun, their hands brushed, neither pulled away. The autumn chill had settled over the city, brushing its breath against every windowpane and turning the leaves brittle with gold. Elena and Noah still met every Thursday, but now it was more than a habit. It was a rhythm, quiet and essential. One afternoon they wandered through a photo exhibition tucked behind a quiet gallery near the West Village. The walls were lined with portraits of strangers, unposed, unpolished moments of people caught mid-thought, mid-laugh, mid-heartbreak. Elena moved slowly from frame to frame, her gaze lingering on faces that had never been trained to hide. "They're not smiling," she whispered. Noah stood beside her. "No, but they're not pretending either." She nodded, eyes glassy. "I spent so long learning how to smile at the right times. It took me years to realize no one ever taught me how to mean it." They stepped outside into the wind, and Elena tugged her coat tighter. They walked in silence for a few blocks until they reached the edge of Central Park. The benches were half empty, the trees rustling gently above. "Can we sit?" she asked. Noah nodded, and they found a quiet bench beneath a flame-colored maple. For a moment, all that spoke between them was the sound of wind and footsteps and distant laughter from the playground nearby. Then Elena said, "There's something I want to tell you." Noah turned to her. He didn't press. He just listened. "My last name is Blackwell," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "Elena Blackwell. My father is Thomas Blackwell. If you've read the business section in the last 20 years, you probably know that name." Noah didn't react. He just watched her face. "I was supposed to marry someone," she continued, "not for love, for convenience, for optics. The merger between two companies was going to be sealed with a wedding dress and a public smile." She paused, her breath catching slightly. "I tried to tell them I didn't want it, that it felt like selling myself off in silk and diamonds. They said I was being emotional, unstable, ungrateful." Noah's hands were still in his coat pockets, but he leaned just slightly closer. "So," she said, her voice shaking now, "I ran. I packed a bag, left my phone in a cab, and vanished into the part of the city no one from my world ever looks for." Noah didn't speak for a moment. Then he said simply, "That doesn't sound like running." Elena blinked. "No?" He shook his head. "That sounds like surviving." She turned to him then, full, vulnerable. "I used to believe no one could love me if I wasn't a Blackwell. If I didn't come with the name, the money, the image. But you never asked me who I was. You just saw me." Noah's eyes didn't flinch. "Because that's all I needed to see." The silence between them grew soft, like a blanket draped across old wounds. From that day on, they began to occupy more of each other's lives. They read in the park, browsed antique shops, passed folded notes across tiny cafe tables. Noah showed her a hidden record store. She introduced him to the joy of chocolate croissants at midnight. They never labeled it, they never rushed it, but piece by piece, their walls lowered. And what grew in the space between them was something that didn't need permission or pedigree. It was presence. And presence, they learned, was more powerful than any name printed on the front page of a newspaper. It was a crisp morning in late November, the kind where the sky looked almost too blue and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and city bread carts. Elena and Noah sat on their usual bench in Central Park, coffee cups in hand, the world just beginning to stir. They weren't speaking much. They never needed to. The silence had become their language, uncomplicated, whole. Then the sound of hurried footsteps broke the stillness. Noah glanced up. At first it looked like tourists, cameras swinging from necks. But then he saw the lenses, the flashbulbs, the shouted names. "Elena! Elena Blackwell!" She turned toward the voice and froze. The swarm came fast, like wolves in tailored jackets. A dozen people with microphones and cameras circled the bench, barking questions like commands. "Elena, is it true you ran from your engagement? Is this the man you left everything for? Who is he? What's your next move? Elena, look this way!" The flashes popped in rapid succession. Light exploded in her eyes. Elena stumbled back a step, breath catching in her throat, one hand rising as if to shield herself. Her other hand searched for Noah, but he was already moving. Without a word, Noah took off his jacket and gently draped it over her head and shoulders, shielding her face from the flashing bulbs. He placed himself between her and the cameras, arms out just slightly, his voice steady but firm. "She doesn't owe you answers," he said. "This isn't news. This is a woman trying to live." More flashes, more shouts. "She's a public figure," someone argued. "She's a person," Noah said. "And she said nothing to you." He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just stood there, solid, unmoving, a quiet wall of protection. Then he turned to Elena, took her hand, and whispered, "Come on." They ran. Through the park's winding paths, past morning joggers and startled dog walkers, down narrow side streets and across avenues, their breaths fogging the cold air, boots slapping pavement in rhythm. They didn't stop until they reached a quiet alley behind an old bookstore, out of sight, out of breath. Noah leaned against the brick wall, heart pounding, still holding her hand. Elena stood in front of him, trembling, not from the run, but from something deeper. She pushed the jacket back, her eyes shining with tears. "I'm not afraid of the cameras," she whispered, voice shaking. "It's not the flashes or the headlines." She took a step closer. "I'm afraid of being seen, and still not being seen." Noah didn't speak. He just pulled her gently into his arms. She pressed her face to his chest, the thudding of his heart steady against her cheek. In that alley, in the hush after the storm, Elena let go, not just of the panic, but of years of control, of pretending, of smiling for people who only saw her reflection, never her depth. Noah didn't try to fix anything. He didn't say she was safe or that it would all be okay. He just held her like someone who knew how to carry silence, like someone who had been unseen too. And that, she realized, was the first time in her life she truly felt visible. The rain came fast, unexpected. One minute they were walking down Lexington in silence. The next, the sky opened like a broken dam. They ran without speaking, past shuttered cafes and closed boutiques, laughter slipping between gasps for breath. Noah spotted the warm glow first, an old bookshop with foggy windows and a crooked sign that read Grantham and Daughters. They ducked inside just as thunder cracked. The bell above the door gave a tired ring, and the scent of old paper wrapped around them like a memory. There was no one at the counter, no customers, just shelves and shelves of forgotten titles and time-worn stories. Noah brushed the water from his shoulders, shaking his head. I guess this city still has some hiding places left. Elena didn't answer. She stood by the doorway, breathing hard, one hand still clinging to the edge of his coat, like she hadn't realized she'd been holding on. He turned and caught the look in her eyes. She wasn't looking at the books. She was looking at him, like she was seeing something she hadn't allowed herself to see until now, or maybe something she hadn't dared believe was real. He led her to the corner of the shop, where an armchair sat under a dusty skylight. A small reading lamp hummed softly beside it. They sat, Noah on the floor beside her, Elena curled in the chair like a child coming in from the storm. For a while they just listened to the rain. Then Elena spoke. Her voice was small but sharp in its honesty. "I've spent most of my life being told what to do, where to stand, who to be. Everything from the way I wear my hair to the people I'm allowed to love has been decided for me." She paused, her hands twisting in the fabric of Noah's coat. "I know how to be obedient, how to perform, but I don't know how to be trusted. I don't know how to let someone in and believe they'll stay." She looked down, ashamed of the tremble in her fingers. Noah didn't try to fix it, didn't offer easy promises or platitudes. Instead, he gently reached out and placed his hand over hers. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," he said, his voice low and steady. "But I do know this. When you look at someone the way you've looked at me, that person is lucky, because it means you're choosing to see them, really see them." He paused, his thumb lightly brushing her knuckles. "And you deserve someone who sees you back. Every day, in the same way." Elena blinked hard, but the tears came anyway, quiet, relentless, like the rain against the window pane. She didn't speak, she just leaned forward and rested her forehead against his, and for a long time they stayed like that, breathing the same small space, anchored by closeness neither of them fully understood, but both had already begun to need. Noah thought maybe she'd vanish again, that once the storm passed, she'd slip away into the shadows of her world, back to names and contracts and obligations. But she didn't. She stayed. When the rain stopped and the shopkeeper returned and raised an eyebrow at the pair huddled in his reading corner, Elena stood slowly and reached for Noah's hand. She didn't let go. They stepped outside together, the world washed clean. The air smelled like possibility, and for the first time Noah realized she wasn't running anymore. The room was small, just a modest community library tucked between an elementary school and a laundromat. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, the chairs mismatched, the microphones slightly outdated, but every seat was filled, and the quiet held weight. Elena stood at the front in a white button-down shirt, her blonde hair pulled into a loose, low knot, no makeup, no designer labels, just her. For the first time, entirely herself. The cameras clicked, but not with the frenzy of tabloids. These were local journalists, community bloggers, a few curious neighbors. People who had seen the headlines, yes, but now came to hear from her, not about her. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "My name is Elena," she began, voice steady. "Not Elena Blackwell, not the heiress, not the runaway, just Elena." Her gaze swept across the room, landing gently on each face. "I left because I was afraid. Afraid that if I stayed, I'd disappear. Not from the world, but from myself. I was surrounded by people who saw my name, my value, my use, but not me." A pause, a breath. But something changed. I met someone who didn't ask for explanations, who didn't care about my last name, who gave me a phone and a moment to be human. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Elena kept going. "I'm not here to scandalize or to reclaim anything. I'm here to let go. I've withdrawn from the Blackwell board. I've declined my inheritance. I've chosen something else." She smiled, soft and real. "A life where I'm not seen for what I represent, but for who I am." The applause was gentle, respectful, not roaring, but honest, just like the room, just like her. Weeks passed. The headlines faded, the noise settled, and in a quiet corner of Brooklyn, Elena and Noah opened a tiny book and tea shop. It had creaky wooden floors and tall windows that caught the afternoon sun just right. Mismatched chairs, shelves stacked with used books and handwritten notes tucked between pages. There was a corner for journaling, a shelf for anonymous letters people could write and leave for strangers, and a wall where people posted answers to messages they'd found. They named it Scene. On opening day, they brewed 5 pots of chamomile and gave away slices of lemon cake. A girl wrote to her father and left it in a book of poetry. A man wrote to his younger self and taped it to the window. No one judged. No one even asked. The space had become what Elena had longed for, a place where people could exist without explanation. One evening in early December, snow began to fall. Soft, drifting flakes that landed like whispers on the windowsill. The sign on the door flipped to closed, and the lights dimmed to their warmest glow. Inside, Noah sat on the long wooden bench near the back of the shop, an old quilt draped over his legs. Elena sat beside him, her legs curled beneath her, a mug of tea in her hands. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I never deleted it," he said, breaking the silence like the soft crack of a log in a fireplace. Elena turned her head. "Deleted what?" He unlocked the screen, tapped a few times, and handed it to her. On the display was a message, never sent, but still alive. "I don't want the money. I just want to be seen." Elena stared at it, her lips parting just slightly. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Then, slowly, she typed, "And I was. By you." She looked up at him and pressed send. Noah smiled. Not the small, polite kind he used with strangers, but the kind that reached deep into his chest, cracked him open and let her in. The next morning, the world was wrapped in white. Elena unlocked the front door of Scene, broom in hand, ready to sweep the snow from the steps. But something caught her eye. On the table just outside the door, beneath a paperweight stone, was a folded note on thick cream paper. She picked it up, opened it carefully. "Thank you for giving me a place to feel seen." No name, no signature, just that. She held the note to her heart and smiled, her breath misting in the morning air. Behind her, Noah stepped out of the doorway and wrapped a soft scarf around her neck. He kissed the top of her head, then the corner of her cheek. He whispered, "I never thought the girl who borrowed my phone would be the one to steal my heart." Elena turned, narrowed her eyes, and reached up to gently pinch his nose. "You're such a sap," she teased, lightly tapping his chest. "Guilty," he said, laughing. They stood there for a moment, the city waking up around them, the snow still falling gently, like punctuation to the quietest kind of love. Then they stepped back inside, together, and the little bell over the door chimed a soft welcome to whoever needed to be seen next. Sometimes, the smallest acts, like handing a phone to a stranger, can change the course of 2 lives forever. Noah did not need a name or a background to see Elena. He simply needed a moment of honesty and a heart open enough to listen. And Elena? She did not need wealth, power, or a perfect image. She just needed someone to stay when she stopped pretending. Their love was not built on grand gestures or dramatic confessions, but on silence shared, hands held through fear, and the quiet power of truly being seen. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of the beauty in small kindnesses, or made you believe in love again, please like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where every story is written to heal, to inspire, and to remind you sometimes the most unforgettable moments begin with a whisper. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, take care and never stop seeing the people who matter.